Welcome everybody. Simon Rosenberg from Hopium Chronicles. This is our monthly gathering of our paid subscribers. Thanks to all of you for helping provide the resources that keeps this place going and the hopium flowing, as I like to say. Because of the support I've gotten, I was able to, at the end of last year, give up all my other outside sources of income and to devote myself full time to this, for better or for worse. and and it's really been a lot of fun. I'm having a great time, and so hopefully all of you are too. This is a brutal business, but we've got to keep things on the up and up. Sometimes just to make sure we all keep our heads on straight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to speak for 15, 20 minutes and then take questions, written questions from everybody. And I'm sure there'll be many. There's a lot going on, and I try not to cover everything in my opening remarks so that we have more time for questions. And then we'll end at the top of the hour. We'll go right up to 8 o'clock Eastern time. So my basic take on the election today is still the same that it's been over the last couple of months, which is that Joe Biden's been a good president. The country's better off. We have a very strong case for reelection. The Democratic Party is strong. We're winning elections all across the country. We're unified, I believe, and we're raising tons of money. And what do the Republicans have? They have Trump, who's the ugliest political thing that any of us have ever seen, and a party that looks much more like a raging dumpster fire than a well-oiled political machine. And so when you push all those things forward, I really would much rather be us than them. And I'm very optimistic about what we're going to be able to do this year. So let's go break down those three things sequentially, right? Number one, Joe Biden's been a good president. And you've all heard me say this, who've heard my presentations. I mean, just remember where we were on January 20th in 2021. The vaccines had not been distributed. The virus was raging. Trump had just grossly mismanaged the virus. So hundreds of thousands of people had died unnecessarily in the United States. And there was just general unbelievable confusion about the virus itself, the nature of the virus itself. The economy was in free fall. The global economy was teetering. And we had just had an unprecedented lack of peaceful transfer of power, an attack on our capital. There wasn't a normal formal transition where one government hands over the reins to the other. And the city that I live in, was under National Guard protection. The capital was for 50 days, and also in an unprecedented event. And I think that when you think about all that, Joe Biden inherited, one of the worst day ones of any president in American history. Country clearly in crisis, a country clearly struggling, an unprecedented weakening and attack on our democracy itself. And look where we are all these years later. It's not perfect, right? But we've come a long way. And I think Joe Biden has met his essential promise that he made to all of us, is that he was going to get us to the other side of COVID successfully. We have the strongest economic recovery of any G7 country in the world, the lowest inflation rate of any G7 country in the world. We have the best job market since the 1960s. Up until recently, the stock market was setting records. We have the lowest uninsured rate in American history. We have incredibly elevated levels of new business formation, which is a sign of incredible health and vitality in the economy. We have the three big bills the president passed. It's going to be creating, not only accelerating the energy transition, which is so vital to our future, but it's going to be creating opportunities and jobs for Americans for a generation to come. As I published this week in Hopium, the Wall Street Journal just had a recent survey of economists, which they do once a quarter, and the results were remarkable. And the headline of the Wall Street Journal, right, Rupert Murdoch publication, was "The American economy is the envy of the world," and it is. And Joe Biden has done a good job. Crime rates and murder rates are plummeting around the country. The deficit I should have mentioned, is trillions of dollars less. The country is in far better shape than it was when he came into office. And I think we're going to have a very strong case for reelection. I think we have a strong case for reelection, and we'll continue to have one as we go deeper into this year. Number two, the Democratic Party itself is strong. In 2018 and 2020, we were able to beat MAGA. We took the House, the Senate, and the presidency away from Trump. But in some ways, what's happened since the spring of 2022, when Dobbs happened, has been almost more remarkable than what happened with us in 2018 and 2020. We in 2022, in the spring of since the spring of 2022, we have consistently overperformed public expectations in polling and in elections, and Republicans have struggled. In 2022, in these same battleground states that we're going to be fighting in the coming months, we gained ground over 2020 in Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Minnesota, Michigan, New Hampshire, Pennsylvania. We were able to get to 59% in Colorado, 57%, 55 in Michigan, 54 in New Hampshire. These were amazing results in what would in a good year. And in 2022, it was supposed to be a red wave year, high inflation, low Biden approval, and we still had this remarkable performance. And in these same battleground states that we're going to be fighting it out, we litigated MAGA in 2022, and we dramatically outperformed all expectations. In 2023, we had a blue wave year all across America, starting with the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat and going to Jacksonville and Colorado Springs, and then taking away the 6-week abortion ban in Ohio and 2 ballot initiatives there that many of you worked on. We outperformed our 2020 numbers by an average of 5 points in dozens and dozens of state House special elections all across the country. We won mayoral races and city council races and school board races all across the country. Andy Beshear's margin in Kentucky grew. And then in Virginia, we not only kept the Senate, but we flipped the House, which very few people thought was possible. And one of the direct results of that was that we ended, I think, this fantasy of the 15-week abortion ban that the Republicans had as their escape hatch out of the political nightmare that they've created for themselves around abortion. But we also just recently, in January, elected the first Black speaker in Virginia's history in the very heart of the old Confederacy, a remarkable collective achievement. And then the question is, would we see the same kind of basic pattern of Republican struggle, Democratic overperformance show up in 2024? And we have. I mean, we saw it in Tom Keene's race in Orlando, Florida, that many of you worked on. We saw it in Tom Suozzi's amazing victory in New York 3, where public polling had us up by 2 to 3 points. And we were told by the media, this is a national bellwether that's really going to tell us so much about the 2024 elections. And we ended up winning that seat by 8 points when we had just lost it 16 months earlier by 7.5 points, a 15.5 point swing in a very short period. I know many of you worked really, really hard on that race. And then we've seen it also show up in Trump's early performance. He's been underperforming public polls. I mean, the myth is, the urban legend is, there's this secret Trump vote and it comes out, he always overperforms public polling. But this year, in this election, not 2020, not 2016, as I wrote today, no election is like any other election. Every election is brand new and sui generis every time. And it's critical to stay close to what you're seeing in this election. And in 2024, Trump's been underperforming his public polls in these early states. And I've really grown to believe, and I tweeted on this, I'm going to write about this tomorrow, that there is a significant amount of evidence that as we are going from adults to likely voters, adults to registered voters, to likely voters, and then to voters, that as we move through that process where people have to make a decision about who they're going to vote for and get educated in that process and become informed about the decisions they have to make, that we overperform and the Republicans struggle. And you saw it in the Marist poll that just came out again today. We had another version of it. It had come out a few weeks earlier that showed that Biden was up 2 in this poll today, but among likely voters, he was up 5. And again, what that signals is that as people are going through that process of waking up and deciding like, hey, this is the real race, it's Trump and Biden, I've got to make my call. As you go into the more intense electorate, we gain ground, right? It's one of the reasons we've been winning in these elections all across the country. But the reason it matters so much is that the whole country is about to go through that process. The whole country is about to go through this process where they have to make a decision. And what we've been seeing is this year, when people on the Republican side have had to make that decision, Trump has lost ground. And it's a central reason why I'm so optimistic. And I'll get into why I think that what happens in a bit about when people look at MAGA now and the ugliness and the extremism of MAGA, that they just can't go there, right? That something broke inside the Republican Party when Dobbs happened, and a big chunk of the Republican Party got loosened from the Republican Party. And this is what I've been saying in these presentations since the beginning of Hopium. And the thing is, it keeps playing out in election after election all across the country, in terms of what we actually are seeing on the ground. And we're again seeing it this year. We also are raising tons of money. We have hundreds of millions of dollars more than Republicans. Our candidates are have far more money than Republican candidates have. It's going to matter because it allows us to control the information environment in these races across the country and push our performance to the upper end of what's possible. Many of you have been part of that, helping us raise money and also do the work, right, to execute and to build these big campaigns that we built in 2022 that we're going to build again in 2024. And also, I think the party's actually very united. And I know that doesn't feel that way this week. I know that this has been a little bit of a tough week. That's part of the reason I wrote my post today. Today felt like one of those days that was a grind day and not a happy day, a day that you got to just put your head down and grind through sort of the noise and the toughness of what's going on around us. But I think that if you look at Biden's poll numbers inside with Democrats and inside the Democratic primary, there was two efforts to challenge him in the primary, Dean Phillips and Robert Kennedy, and both failed to launch. And so I do think, as somebody who's been in this business for a long time, when I've seen the party split before, that's not happening now. I mean, just last week, you noticed Biden did this major event, right, with Bernie Sanders and AOC, a week after he had just done this major event with Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. I think they're doing a very good job in making it clear to the family that we're all rallying behind our leader in this time of enormous crisis in the country. And then them, let's talk about them for a minute, Republicans. I think that, I've written about this a lot this week, and so I won't go through every single detail, but I think that Trump himself is far more degraded than he was in the past. His performance on the stump is far more erratic, impulsive, and kind of wild. He's saying crazy and damaging things almost every time that he speaks. And so, number one, as a candidate, I think he's far weaker than he was in 2016 and 2020. His agenda is also far more dangerous and far more extreme, which is remarkable given that this politics has been failing again and again and again in elections. You would assume that if it wasn't working, you would try something else or to try to soften the edges a little bit. And they've done the exact opposite. They've actually leaned into the extremism of MAGA. And MAGA today, if you didn't like MAGA in 2020 or 2022, this version of MAGA is far more menacing and dangerous than the ones that came before. But to me, I think one of the most central things that's about to happen, as somebody who's been involved in a lot of campaigns and understands the arc of how campaigns work and how communication happens, is that voters are going to learn six things about Donald Trump in the next few months that they didn't know about him in 2020 when they voted him out of office. Number one is that he raped E. Jean Carroll in a department store dressing room. Number two, that he and his family oversaw one of the largest financial frauds in American history, have been fined close to $500 million for that illegal activity. And he and his two sons have been banned from doing a lot of business in New York State. Three, that he stole America's secrets. He lied to the FBI about it. He shared those secrets with other people. And it was one of perhaps the greatest betrayal of America by a former president in all of our history. Number four is that he led an insurrection against the United States. He led an armed attack on the Capitol on one of the only days that all 435 members are there at the same time. And he's promised to finish the job, basically, and end American democracy for all time if he gets into the White House in January. Fifth, he and his family have corruptly taken more money from foreign governments than any political family in American history. And sixth, he's singularly responsible for ending Roe. And I think that what's happened in the last few weeks, in this sort of moment of idiocy, as I call it, where he thought he was doing this really clever thing by saying, well, I'm just going to let the states decide about what they're going to do on abortion and reproductive freedoms. What he did by doing that, and I'm not even sure he knew, by the way, what he did was that he then endorsed the most extreme abortion initiatives and laws in the country. So that means that he's for example, Idaho, which has no exceptions, right? It has jail time for doctors, and it has an anti-trafficking statute in it, right? Which is probably the most extreme bill that exists in the country today. Donald Trump was for that. And if he's for that in Idaho, if he's for that anywhere, he can be for it everywhere if you believe that that's acceptable. And even just today, right, his campaign acknowledged that they are open and will accept the monitoring of pregnancies in women all across this country to make sure that they don't have an abortion. I mean, this is Handmaid's Tale stuff, right? Like this is pretty extraordinary stuff, and we're here now. Right? If we're here now, right, with this, with Trump and his extremism, and so I think any one of these six things could keep Trump out of office, prevent him from winning the election. He's going to have to overcome all six, and I just don't think he has the political skill or the campaign underneath him because they're struggling to raise money. The RNC is a mess. Republicans have been indicted in key battleground states for trying to overturn the American election. They haven't staffed up in the battleground states. There's an unprecedented rebellion against Trump in the Republican Party from two former vice presidents, a former party nominee, a former party chair, many dozens of people who served in senior positions in his administration. We've never seen the kind of rebellion against a nominee inside a party that we're seeing with Trump right now. And I think the permission structure that those never Trump or never MAGAs are going to create for Republicans to not vote Republican this cycle is going to be far greater than what we saw in 2020 and 2022. To me, the threat that this never Trumper movement is to Trump, it's an existential threat for him. It's it's part of the reason Republicans performed so poorly in 2022 is these Trumpy candidates couldn't pull their party back together again in the battleground states. I think that's the likely scenario this time too. This guy's just too far. He's gone too much for everybody, and that it's going to be impossible for him to build a winning coalition in the election. But then finally, let me just say, and I think this is really important given that I feel like, the protests and everything that have gone on has felt hard, right? And difficult in the last, couple of weeks. That I want to just remind everybody, I think why, at least I'm here, and to help share that with you about why I'm doing this in my son's old bedroom here in Washington, D.C., is that, I go back to this speech that or a speech that Joe Biden referenced in his State of the Union address a few months ago, which was FDR's speech in 1941, the State of the Union that he gave then, which is also known as the Four Freedoms speech, where FDR explained to the world that he wanted to see a world after World War II that was based upon freedom as a foundational value, not dominion or not authority over another. And these four freedoms, the freedom of speech, the freedom of worship, the freedom from want, the freedom from fear, became the basis of the modern world. Those four freedoms were baked into or built into the foundation of the Atlantic Charter in late 1941, which created the alliance that won World War II. It was negotiated between Churchill and FDR. They became the basis and the foundation of the UN Charter in 1945, which articulated that countries should be free and one country should not have dominion over another. They became the foundation of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, negotiated by Eleanor Roosevelt, which for the first time in international law articulated that individuals should have freedoms and opportunities, not just nation states, which had been the case previously in the history of international law. And those four freedoms became the basis of the modern world. The whole modern world that we understand got built on top of those four freedoms. And at that moment, also, freedom became really, truly the foundational value of the Democratic Party, the modern Democratic Party itself. And what's important to recognize as we go forward is those four freedoms have built a golden age in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive than there's been in this 80 years of the era of the four freedoms, the Pax Americana. We've seen life expectancy go from the mid 40s into the mid 70s. We've seen literacy rates in the world triple, where more people now can do and contribute and be part of broader society than ever before. We've seen extreme poverty rates plummet despite a huge explosion in population. And we've seen more people live under democracies in recent years than any time in human history. And what's important for us as Democrats, when we think about that world that we imagined and built, is that we did that. The Democratic Party of the United States did that. That we created this golden age in human history where there's never been a better time to be alive. And it's why that I think that we're part of the most noble political project in all of human history. We've done more good for more people than any other organized political force, in my view, in all of human history. And that world that we imagined and built, that golden age for humankind, is being now threatened by Russia, by China, by Iran, by Hezbollah, by Hamas, by MAGA here in the United States. It's under threat. And, our party was called once before in the 1940s. What Joe Biden mentioned in his speech is he said, FDR came here in 1941 and started rallying the country to fight this threat of fascism abroad. Well, Joe Biden in that speech and what we're doing together is that we're responding to a new call. I mean, we were called once before as a party and we answered. We're being called again. And the reason I'm so fundamentally optimistic about this election is that I know that millions and millions of Americans are answering that call. All of you are answering that call by being here tonight and doing the work that you do. And I've been so inspired by the energy, the passion, the love of country, the patriotism that I've gotten from all of you in this journey over the last couple of years. And we need it because this fight that's in front of us is the big one, right? Losing is not an option. We have to leave it all on the playing field. And the goal here is not just to win this election, but to win it by a big number, by 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 points, so that the message to the world is a repudiation of MAGA. It's the only way the Republicans are going to start to move away from this politics is if they view it as a loser. And so we need to not just win, but we need to win big, which is why that every call you make, every text you send, every postcard you post, every message that you send through your social networks, right? Every door that you knock on, it matters because every extra vote will matter in this election because the margin is going to matter. Yes, we need to win. The electoral college is going to be close. All that stuff is true. But what's also true is there is a big difference between winning this election by 4 points and winning it by 8 points. And so every single vote, no matter what state they're in, is going to really matter in this election. So I'm really proud to be in this fight with all of you. This has been an incredible adventure to be on here at Hopium Chronicles. I've learned so much from you, but more than anything else, all the energy that I get and the work that I do is coming from my interactions with all of you. The passion, the love of country, the patriotism, the commitment that you all have, your willingness to do the work, to do more, worry less, right? Is part of is the energy that's fueling this community. So thank you all very much. Let me get to questions, and thanks for being part of this plucky, wonderful community at Hopium Chronicles. Let me just open up some questions. Yeah, I'm going to speak about the protests and young voters and everything at the end. I will leave time for that, but I want to get to some other things first. And I know I've been writing about it this week, but I also feel like I want to leave that conversation to the end because it's, we need to talk it out a little bit. And let me go to some of the other questions. So the vice president, I get this, there are a couple of questions I get all the time. And I'm seeing them show up here. So let me just try to be responsive to them. Number one is the question about Robert Kennedy, third party. It's a factor, right? It matters in the election, but I think that we have to recognize that the most important third party, rogue party, splinter party movement in the country is aligned with us. It's this pro-democracy, anti-MAGA, never Trumper group that is growing in power and in number, and they're going to be aligned with us. I mean, imagine at the end of the election if somehow we can get Mitt Romney to campaign with Joe Biden and do a 30-second spot for him in the end, telling Republicans that they can't vote for Donald Trump. We have unprecedented tools to tell Republicans and speak to them and explain to them why they shouldn't be voting for Donald Trump. We already know from polling that large numbers of Republicans don't want to vote for him. And Donald Trump, again, in one of these moments of just pure idiocy, right, told Nikki Haley and her supporters they weren't really welcome in his party. I don't know if anyone explained to him, he didn't win the last election and he needs more voters, not less, right? And so, I think we have real opportunities here to build this kind of unique pro-democracy coalition. And I think that all of you have seen, right, that there's no question that the campaign, the DNC are not taking anything for granted with Robert Kennedy, and they're engaging him. And to use the term we use in politics, they're working to degrade him. The good news is that he's given us a lot of ammunition, and we're seeing now in many polls that he's much more attractive to Republican voters than he is to Democratic voters. And in some ways, I have this theory, right? That if you're Bannon and Trump and you're like trying to find a third party candidate, they're trying to get Kanye West to run in 2020, and that flamed out. They came up with Kennedy. Like somebody came up with this idea of Kennedy. Democratic name shows a bipartisan coalition coming together for Trump, right? We know that Trump's largest donor. Can everyone please put it on mute? Right, that would be great. That Trump's largest donor is also Kennedy's largest donor, and that there are Republican operatives running his campaign. Kennedy was a Trump appointee, right? He was appointed by Trump to an advisory board on vaccines and public health. And so this campaign, we have to view it as kind of a Republican op to try to take votes away for Biden. But it would be so Trumpian, right? In their extremism, in their idiocy, their incompetence, if they created a candidate that was like Dr. Frankenstein's monster that ends up hurting Trump more than Biden. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but there's a lot of data now showing that is what's happening now. And the reason why is that when you look at Kennedy's profile, right? He's anti-vax, he's pro-Russia. I mean, he doesn't line up with Democratic priorities and Democratic voters. And he's also uniquely terrible, right? When you watch him on television, he lies all the time. He's a ridiculous public performer. And I'm not scared by any of these folks. They're a factor. And I'd like to say that the way I view this election is all the things that we need to do. And let's be clear, right? Our coalition has wandered, and I forgot to mention polling. I'm going to go through this in a second. There's a piece of our coalition that's wandering right now, right? We're not where we want to be in this election, but all the things we have to do, I think, are within our power to do in traditional political, tools that we have. Making Trump look like a serious presidential candidate again, I'm not convinced is something that's within the power of a campaign. And I just want to go over polling, and I'm going to have this in Hopium tomorrow in prepping for today. Biden's gained 1.7 points in the last few weeks in 538. 538 just launched now their their average for the presidential race. They just launched it last week or the week before. Biden's gained 1.7 points, and we're now 0.7. And in fact, he actually gained a couple tenths of a point this week because we've actually had a whole bunch of polls showing Biden ahead this week. And so that the presidential race, the raw vote is within margin of error. We've gained 3.5 percentage points in what's called the congressional generic in recent months. Congressional generic is this basic question set that says, are you going to vote Democrat or Republican for Congress? We're now ahead in that in 538's tracker on that. We've gained 3.5 points. So structurally, the Democratic brand is in better shape. Biden's in better shape. We know that in the Senate polling, right, we're in very strong shape. We're not behind in any of the Senate races that matter to us right now. There is no scary poll in any of the Senate races. We know that Josh Stein has been ahead meaningfully in a bunch of the early polls in North Carolina. And we know that Navigator Research, which is a consortium of center-left pollsters, has done a lot of work in the battleground House races, just-in-House battleground House races. And our candidates, both in the generic Democrat and also the named Democrat, meaning that, Democrat, Republican for House, but then you actually name the two candidates. Our candidates are in far better shape in terms of their brand, favorabilities, and all those things, right? The brand of Democrats in the House battlegrounds, congressional Democrats, right, is better than the Republicans. And we have much more money than they do in these House races right now. So all of that is very positive. And then if you go into the battleground states, to be fair, this week there were two battleground sets of polls, right? The CBS poll and the Emerson Hill poll. And remember, the Hill is a right-leaning publication in Washington. Both of those polls had all of their states within margin of error, right? And yes, some of them, Trump was ahead, Biden was ahead in one of them, right? But the way margin of error works, I want to explain this to everybody, is that if you're within margin of error, then nobody's ahead. There is no such thing as a lead if you're within margin of error, because what the poll just isn't accurate enough to be able to get to that level of precision. And so in the Emerson poll, when you go look at it, and I went and looked at it before I came on here, it says all 7 states are within margin of error. That means they're tied. They're functionally mathematically tied, statistically tied. So the two battleground state polls that came out this week had 10, they polled in 10 states, three of the states twice. Every one of them was within margin of error. And so we're probably a little bit behind where we want to be in the battleground, right? And we're not where we want to be in the national vote. But Donald Trump is not ahead in this election. He's not favored. He's not doing better than we are. The election has moved meaningfully in our direction. And structurally, right, we're doing really well in these Senate races. We're doing really well in the generic. We're doing really well in the House brand, right? And so what's likely to happen, and this is what I said, if you've listened to my talks, this is what I said was, the likely scenario of what would happen is that as voters engaged that Biden's numbers were going to go up, because of all the ugliness and awfulness of the right and of MAGA. People know it, right? And when they actually have to start looking at the ugliness of Trump on trial, all those things, the 6 things I mentioned, everything else, Trump loses ground, right? We've seen this happen again and again and again. So this is structurally why I'm very optimistic. I just want to say that just in the last 24 hours, the FAU poll, the Ipsos, Reuters, Marist all have Biden ahead. Just came out in the last 24 hours. So this notion that this has been a bad polling week for us or that we've kind of receded a little bit, it's not true. And I think that what I'm beginning to see in the polling is it's a little reminiscent of 2022, which is the independent polls have the race close and competitive. And then there are these handful of like really Republican outlier races, polls that then push the polling averages a half a point, or a point and a half in a certain direction, right, towards the Republicans. But if you just stay focused on the independent polls, not the Republican leaning polls, not the +6 crazy CNN poll that ran, that had Trump ahead with women and young people. I mean, Trump ahead with women and young people, right? Which is like not possible. I mean, today the Pew just released, and I'm going to put this in Hopium tomorrow, a 7,000 person sample poll. Right? Most of these polls are 800, 1,000, 1,200. And they had, by the way, young people +21 for Biden, very similar number to what we saw in the Harvard IOP, very close to the same number that Biden received in 2020. So we've now had 2 enormous large sample polls taken in the last few weeks showing no meaningful erosion for Biden with young people, right? He's got work to do. I mean, we're not at 51%. He got 51 last time, but there's no kind of structural problem with young people. In the Pew poll, where we had the greatest structural problem was with Hispanic voters, and we have work to do there. And that's one of the reasons we're not doing better, that Biden's not doing better in the Southwest. Let me get to the next question that always, well, let me just go in here and just see, there's so many questions. Yeah, I mean, I want to just be clear that of the battleground states, the state where we have been, let me go a little bit more into the battleground. The state where we've had the most polls showing us ahead in the last few weeks is Michigan. And this idea that there is, problems for the Democrats in Michigan, it's just not bearing out in the polling, right? And we have to remember, let's talk about the 7 states, and I want to explain how I see them right now. So to me, it's likely, and I know Ron Brownstein had a piece today that has a slightly different take on this than I'm about to go through, which is fine. I mean, I think Ron missed a few, Ron's my buddy, but I think he missed a few things here. And I feel very good about Pennsylvania and Michigan. I think Wisconsin, what I worry about with Wisconsin, not worry, but we have to remember that we lost a Senate race there that we thought we were going to win in 2022. And the Republican convention is going to be there, which just creates this kind of wild card. And so I see Wisconsin being sort of one rung below. I know Ron Brownstein has it slightly different than that. But then to me, this next and super interesting tier is Arizona and North Carolina. And as all of you know, I've been working really hard to raise money. We've been raising money into North Carolina and Arizona because, in both of those states, they have ultra MAGA tops at the top of the ticket. And it's Kari Lake in Arizona and her 1864 ban. And it's Mark Robinson, who may be, the most extraordinary MAGA that we've ever seen, right, in North Carolina. And if in those races we see kind of a structural collapse for Mark Robinson and for Kari Lake, then we're going to win those states. And I, and so I think that just like what happened in 2022, these sort of, what if you remember, they called it bad candidate problems. The Republicans had bad candidate problems. It just was all of their candidates, right? But the two bad candidate problems they have this time that I think could end up giving the Electoral College to Joe Biden is Kerry Lake and Mark Robinson. And the fact that Donald Trump allowed a story to be written where he has told Kerry Lake she's not allowed to go visit Mar-a-Lago anymore, and she needs to go, go win with, Arizona. And given that in Arizona, the House and Senate Republicans just voted to repeal or allow a vote to repeal the 1864 law, shows that they are in unbelievable retreat right now in Arizona. And we haven't had any real serious, in my view, polling since the 1864 debacle in the last few weeks. So I want to see what's happening with Arizona. I think so I'm very bullish on North Carolina and Arizona right now. And then we have Georgia, and I always say Nevada wrong. And so just, you can correct me because I overthink it now every time I do it. But Nevada's going to be close until election day. It always is. I mean, it's nobody ever wins that state by a big margin. And we still have an incredible political machine there that Harry Reid built that still exists there for the Democratic Party. And then Georgia, I think because there isn't a statewide candidate like Mark Robinson or Kerry Lake, to help propel us in Georgia. I think Georgia is going to be tough. And so it's one of the reasons that I just want all of you to know that one of the main reasons that I chose Arizona and North Carolina to be the places that we raised money into was because of this. I felt was an unprecedented opportunity to make gains there because of their extremists at the top of the ticket. And because this is exactly what happened in 2022, right? Where we were able to take advantage and do really well in states because there was just repulsive, ugly, extremist Republicans that sent people running to the hills, right? I think we have both in both North Carolina and in Arizona. We have that opportunity this time. Let me just see other questions here. Yeah, we're going to do the student stuff in a few minutes. Let me just get to other stuff. Yeah, David asked a question about who else is going to come out for Biden Harris. Look, I've been on calls with the campaign about this, about the issue of we need to view Never MAGA, Never Trumpers as a constituency, and how much we get out of that constituency will in part depend about how much we put into it, right? How hard is it? How important is it to us to get a Mitt Romney or a Dick Cheney or whomever, right, to do a 30-second spot or to campaign? These are all things that a campaign and a political operation have to go make happen, right? Whether it's with a labor union. Oh, I forgot to mention also that in the industrial heartland, those three states, right, we have the most aggressive union efforts that we've ever seen. There's never been. Joe Biden is the most pro-union president in modern times. The unions are responding and spending tons of money. The union-led effort in the heartland in those three states is going to be unprecedented. And I've been sharing those ads with you, some of the early ads, on Hopium. They're very impressive. They're really well done. And I think this is another arrow in our quiver that we haven't always had in the past. And I should mention that a lot of folks, I have to go watch the Rachel Maddow piece on the Republican Senate candidates because this guy in Wisconsin is a loon, and I just have to do a little bit more work on him. I just haven't gotten around to learning that. So Florida, Texas, let me answer to that. I don't know about either of them yet. And I think we have to be open to them. I think we have to recognize that the cost of going in there is extraordinary. And it has to be real. And I don't know that either's real yet, but we also have time. I think we don't know the real impact of what's going to happen with the Florida ballot initiative. I mean, I'm very confident, or I'm very optimistic that we're going to pass the Florida ballot initiative. How far Democrats can get, underneath that, we don't know. But certainly we should make gains. And as a national political reporter I spoke to today said, Republicans haven't been on the defensive in Florida in over 20 years. And, they don't know how to, they don't necessarily know how to operate in an environment, where where one of the most important issues in the election, they're polling at, 20-25% on. I will tell you that as a political professional, there aren't many campaigns that have ever had to defend in modern times an issue that people vote on where your party is at 20-25%, like the way they are on the 6-week ban in Florida. And we should note, right, that the 6-week ban I should have mentioned this in my opening remarks, that the 6-week ban took effect today in Florida, and millions of women lost fundamental rights and freedoms that they had long held today in Florida. It looks like we're going to be able to forestall the 1864 ban, but I don't know what's going to happen there. And I just haven't been able to read up on it today. I was a little surprised how quickly the Republicans have distanced themselves, from what is among the most extremist laws that have ever been implemented in the United States in modern times. And so I do think that what is still a big wild card that we don't know about this election is the impact of ongoing stripping of rights and freedoms away from women. It isn't something that happened before. It's continuing and it's spreading. And it's making the Republicans, I think, to many people, will make them look more menacing and dangerous. And it will make manifest the threat that they represent to our rights and freedoms, not just around reproductive issues, but all of them, right? And so I think this is a big deal what happened today, and I think that we'll see what happens in Arizona. But I think the Republicans are Donald Trump, in that idiocy I described earlier, where he thought he was being clever about abortion, decided, has put the Republican Party now on record defending an issue that polls in the teens and low 20s. And again, there's been no issue since I've been in this business and that I can recall where a national party on something that matters to voters that they vote on is in the teens, 20s, mid 20s, right? The Republicans are trying to do something that nobody's done before. They're trying to win an election with the most unpopular radical position on an issue that really matters, and with a candidate who's campaigning from the courthouse and not the White House, and is, a serial criminal, right in front of our eyes. It's why I continue, when you take a step back and you get out of the media scrum every day and the sort of general way the media operates these days, which is they overestimate Republican strengths and underestimate ours. When you take a step back and listen to everything I said tonight, I mean, they're the ugliest political thing we've ever seen. They just are. And I just believe, right, given everything that's happened in recent years, that when we execute against that, and the ads are running for months, and that we're putting more ads on the air, and we have a better ground operation because of all of you and the volunteers that we have, and they have this broken party underneath them, and the worst candidate we've ever seen, right? That over time, when you push those things forward, it's likely that we gain 3, 4, 5 points. It just is. And it doesn't mean it'll happen, right? I want to be clear. I'm not predicting anything. Nobody can predict the future. All I can tell you is what I think is likely to happen based on all my years doing this and the data that's in front of us. And it's why I'm still so centrally optimistic about the moment. And Texas, I think it's going to be tough, but again, we can't foreclose it as an option in this cycle. Let me just go in to see some other questions here. Yeah, I mean, I'm about to announce our House endorsements. Several people have asked about Kamala Harris, and I spoke about this on Lawrence O'Donnell's show the other night. So I know the vice president. When I ran for party chairman in 2005 against Howard Dean, she was one of my national co-chairs and campaigned for me in California, and we've known each other a long time. And I didn't win that race, by the way. I came really close, but Howard Dean beat me, as he probably should have, by the way. And so we've known each other a long time, and I've seen her recently. I did a call with her. I can just tell you that what I'm excited about in watching her on TV and watching her events is that she just seems really good. She seems confident and strong and articulate, and just whatever the bumps were in the early days, I think we're way past that now. I think she's gained confidence through the job, through the work, right? She's been the vice president now for a few years, and she's grown, and you can feel that in her. I mean, she knows the issues. She's traveled around the world. She's met with foreign leaders. She's sat through economic briefings, right? You know, what you look for in politicians is, do they grow? Do they get bigger, right? When, you know, and do they take up more space? Do they get more capable? It's clearly happening with her, right? Like, I just, there's no way to deny it. And I know that there's still this agita in the family a little bit, about her. I think it's more concentrated with older people actually than with younger people. But I will just tell you that, you know, as somebody who's been doing this a long time and watched a lot of politicians, you can read a lot into body language, right? And she just looks happy and confident, and like she's a happy warrior. She's bringing it. You know, I think she's really contributing both in terms of the government and on the campaign. And I think that, you know, we should, you know, it's also just the reality that she's on the ticket, and we got to just, you know, we got to go out. This is our team, and we got to go out and work hard and sell them as hard as we can. But I also think people should be more upbeat about her than they are. And I, you know, I'm going to try to see. I can't. I know it'd be unlikely that I can get her to come and hang out with us at Hopium, but I want to try because I would like you to see our engagement from people who've known each other for a long time, and perhaps give you a different understanding of who she is. I mean, for those of you who've watched my interviews on Hopium, you've seen how intimate they are and how relaxed they are. Often not the way the politicians often are. And I need to. I'm gonna. I haven't asked yet because I'm just waiting, but let me see what I can do on that. And I think it would be a well attended event. I have a feeling if she came on, but let me see what I can work on. I mean, we did get Gavin Newsom, right? So like a few weeks ago. The so let me do this. We got 10 minutes left. Let me do the protest. I have tried in this community to discourage discussion about this because I know respectfully that we're not all on the same page, and that there's so many things that we are on the same page about, and we have to just stay focused on winning, that I didn't really want to go into this place that I knew was divisive and difficult and challenging for us. And so I've asked people to not really talk about it very much. Right? And I haven't talked about it very much. I think that my view on that changed this week, and I've now posted twice about the protests, and I'm doing it because I feel like something that is changing with the protests. That, to me, and I know not everyone's going to agree with what I'm about to say because we've had a very robust and frankly respectful discussion on this in our paid subscriber chat. That the that there's been an escalation in recent days where there are now on college campuses across the country, including at my alma mater, Tufts, that the encampments are threatening the ability for schools to have a commencement, a normal graduation. We already saw the graduation at USC get canceled. And I just think that if we somehow end up as a party on the side of not allowing kids to have normal graduations and be able to complete their finals, that it could be devastating for us politically. And because I have three Gen Z kids and who are 18, 21, and 23. And the group of students that are on college campuses now, the seniors, all of them had all their graduations canceled 4 years ago. And the zeitgeist, where I think that the protesters have sort of misread the room a little bit, is that the group of students that are in college now and will be increasingly in college over the next few years all had extraordinary disruption in their lives that lasted for a long time at a very formative period of their lives, and they were scarred by it. And what they want is they want normalcy. My daughter's going to USC, one of the schools that's had in the fall, in part because she wants to go to a school with big football and traditional American stuff, right? Because she was denied that to some degree, you know, for several years, where she didn't have a normal high school experience, where she was doing her classes on Zoom and everything else. And there is this incredible desire, I think, among this group of young adults to have normalcy and not chaos. And I think that the protesters are misreading this a little bit. in terms of the zeitgeist of these younger Gen Zers, not older Gen Zers. And we know from polling, by the way, that younger Gen Zers, these 18 to 24-year-olds, are more Republican than Gen Zers who are older Gen Zers, right? There's an actual split. And I think some of this has to do with Gen Z being exposed to Trump's machismo, to, we can go through the whole list. The video, men were thrown into video games for 18 months, which is very right-wing culture. I think a lot of things have happened, but I think that the obligation that we all have as parents, as concerned citizens, is that we need to let these kids do their finals and have their commencements uninterrupted. This is not a big ask. And if somehow we become the party that is encouraging the disruption of the end of year activities, I think there will be millions of people who will be very angry at us. I don't think this is a pie in the sky thing. And so my view is, the reason I've spoken out is that I'm concerned, based on the posting I've done, that there has been an escalation, and that we need to make it very clear, very simply, that we believe in the right to protest, right? We believe that cops shouldn't be coming onto college campuses with riot gear. We believe that, that I believe that Bibi Netanyahu should go, and has royally screwed up the war and done extraordinarily bad things. I believe we can go down the list of things we believe, but we also believe, I think, that these young people who've been so scarred and have been so traumatized, and at critical moments in their lives, need to have this event happen uninterrupted. And this is not a big ask, in my view, because, and I would also then add to this, and this is just my other sort of secondary point I want to make, is that I think this idea the protests have been peaceful is just completely false. And I'm almost kind of shocked by it, how often it's said, because it's not true. And if you read the letter today that I posted today from the president of the University of Chicago, who does a remarkable job. I mean, this was one of the most informative things I've read during this whole period, right? Because I'm torn like everybody. Free speech, right? Like, what's the proper thing? We don't really know. He argued very persuasively that the encampments were a violation of free speech and not a reinforcement of it. And I would just encourage all of you to read the letter, because the thing that what he argues, and this is part of what's happening at Tufts and other places, is that these students are taking public land away without permits, without permission, taking them out of the use of the public, the community, right? And are being told that this is violating school policies, and that they'll be punished if they continue it, because it's not authorized. There is all sorts of legitimate ways of engaging in this protest. But the notion that it's okay just to take a big chunk of the campus, prevent graduation from happening, right? Prevent people from using parts of these campuses is a far more aggressive act, I think, than is being portrayed, right? Particularly when these kids who are staying there at night need police protection in urban areas that are wide open campuses. Those police now are not occupying, policing other parts of the campus. And so I think, the encampments themselves are much more aggressive than kind of a protest of 100 people outside of a building than people really understand. The second thing I would say is that, if I can just say this, is that the thing that I've been really sort of shocked by, to be honest, is the occasional times, or the frequent times, that some of the protesters are embracing this kind of anti-Zionist kind of worldview, this ideology, that Israel is an illegitimate country, and that it is an occupying force, and that it needs to be overturned by force, and that Israel needs to be returned back to the Palestinians, and the Jews need to leave. And and that's the basis. That's what Hamas believes. That's what Hezbollah believes. That's what Iran believes. That's what a lot of young Americans believe too, I've learned. I've been kind of surprised by this, because that's not a two-state solution. That's a one-state solution. That's the end of Israel, and through armed means. That means that these protests are violent. They're not peaceful, because they're calling for a violent overthrow of a country. And I just want everyone to recognize that when you are calling for a violent overthrow of a country, that is, you're now violating the fundamental charter of the United Nations in 1945, and it brings you to a place of terrorism, right? Where you're actually advocating for the violent overthrow and the ending of a legitimately recognized international country that's been recognized since the 1940s. And when I became aware that this was like an entire school of thought, where it wasn't about restoring a two-state solution, which is what Joe Biden's been arguing for, where Palestinians have their own homeland, but it's about the elimination of Israel and the removal of Jews through force and violence from Israel itself. I was surprised by that. I'm just going to be really honest. I'm surprised that young Americans are making that case. And when you say river to the sea, right, and you say all these Hamas chants, you're now putting yourself on the side of not peace, but violence. And so I just want to say that these are the two things I'm going to say, because I could go on for much longer about this. We can do better here. And I think, as I wrote today, my hope is for colleges in the fall that they take this energy and this passion that's been exhibited, right? And that they use it to create campus-wide discussions that are channeled, and we channel this intensity and that we've all seen into really constructive educational efforts to help people come to a greater understanding of these issues, right? And that the schools themselves also draw a finer line on things like encampments and masking and all these things that have created or bringing on outside people from outside of campus. We need to make sure these campuses are safe. And the fact that we saw in UCLA last night an encampment getting vandalized and attacked by forces that we still don't know, because they were also all masked, by the way, is also not okay. It's not okay. So I think that I will just say that what's important for us is going forward is that we all need to go through, I think, a collective learning together about these issues, about what is a proper protest in a college campus. How do we allow students to learn and to have commencement activities while others, can exercise their right to protest? How do we come to, I think, a better understanding about the history behind all this? And frankly, the fact that Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas are now openly aligned with Russia in a genocidal activity in Ukraine, and that Iran and Hamas and Hezbollah have genocidal intent in Israel, right? And so I think there's a broader context here that we have to work together. And I've tried to keep this out of hopium because it's so divisive and difficult. But I think it's time now for us to begin to talk about this in a more intelligent way, because I'll be honest with you, I've been surprised with the level of ignorance that the protesters and the students have exhibited in their public communication, and frankly, some people in our own community about this over the last few months. So I'm going to figure out with all of you how to engage on this in a way that's respectful, where and recognizing I do have incredibly strong opinions about this. You notice I have never used the word anti-Semitism throughout all of this, because I actually don't think this is really about Jews. I think this is about something much bigger than that, which is that we now have young college students praising Hamas and Hezbollah. I mean, Hamas killed, a whole lot of Americans on October 7th. It wasn't just Israelis. And, the idea that somehow we've now got lots of young Americans sort of saddling up for the global jihadi movement is like not a great development, I think, for our country. And so I feel like we have a lot of learning to do here together. And I don't want this to become the obsessive thing at Hopium. I don't want this to be divisive in our own community. We've done a lot of amazing things together, and I'm really proud of what we've done. But I also think we're at a point where the protest movement is endangering Joe Biden's ability to win the election. And I can't allow that to happen. And neither, I think, can any of us. I mean, the stakes here are far, obviously preserving American democracy, ensuring that women have rights and freedoms that are long held. It matter more than what happens to the fate of people in Gaza. It just does. And I know that that's going to be uncomfortable with some people, but I think we have to keep our priorities straight here, in my own view, and recognize that, this has become a serious challenge to Joe Biden. I know we're not all going to agree on this. And I do think it's important, though, that together we come to better understandings about everything that's in front of us. So I will continue to share with you things that I think are thoughtful and interesting to help inform the community. If many of you have weighed in very aggressively in the last couple of days about how you feel about this and how we should comport one another, but I'm really disappointed, to be honest with you, about my understanding of what this protest movement has become. It's not peaceful. It's violent. It's many people in the movement are expressing open support for violence and for the ending of the state of Israel. And I think that we can be in a place where we're for peace, two-state solution, which is where Joe Biden is. Bibi's not there. Hamas isn't there. We have to be there, right? Full state for Palestine. There's work we can do here, but we also have to keep our eyes on the prize here as well. And we can't let this become something that tears our family apart in a time when we have to come together to go fight something that is actually far more, in my view, consequential and meaningful. So I'm going to end with that. I'm going to and thank you all very much. And I know that all of you will be letting me know how you feel about what I just said. And you should, by the way, you should. I'm encouraging it. Please bring it on, right? Let's have the conversation. Let's do it in a respectful way and to work really hard if you can before engaging in this to at least read the things that I've been writing and sharing with you so that you're working off of a body of text and knowledge, right? That we can create a common understanding of that. Love you guys. Been so proud to be in this fight with all of you. I feel good about where we are. We have a lot of work to do, but I'm confident, I'm optimistic that what we can do is the things that we need to do. I don't know how you put lipstick on the Trump pig. And it's the end of the day why I think we're going to win this thing. Take care, everybody. Bye bye.